Hello and welcome. First, a word from our sponsors, Everett. Thank you, Everett. My name is Catherine H. Ayers. I am a writer, and I am an illustrator, and I'm a mama. Today, I'm going to read you a short story that I wrote 3 years ago for a competition when I was 17. It's a dark fantasy story called The Fog. And though it doesn't fit my current style, I still hope you'll enjoy it. It is creepy and mysterious and really fits the scene of mid-September as fall is just around the corner. And unless Everett has anything to say, we shall begin. The Fog. I stepped through the wet dirt along an old and forgotten road. The road that so many beings had walked through in the days gone by. But now, in these times, the road was abandoned. No creature had touched it for over 1,000 years. I could tell that much. For the only thing that signified life on the road was that of my own footprints. And I was the only one who could walk on the road now. I was the last of my kind, and never will there ever be one such as me again. And the road was made for us, for me. Not even a spider could crawl along the muddy path. Not a living thing except for me or my people could even touch the road. That's how it was made. The only thing that walked on the road was me, and nothing could stop me, not even this fog. This fog was the only thing in my way. It covered the land, hid things. It turned the world into a half-finished painting, and it veiled the things that must be seen, and not even the fresh mountain air could wipe it away. I carried a heavy bundle on my back. I needed to keep it safe. The contents were precious, and they needed to be kept unharmed until I arrived. It was my duty, my mission, my end to deliver it. Something gleamed at the corner of my eye, something red, and every time it blinked, I twitched. It was the distant light of a cell tower, gleaming even through this thick mist. I often wondered if I would ever get away from the plays of humans. This land used to be pure, wild, free, but now, only a few miles from these very woods, there sat a small town. And from that town, roads had been built, shooting in every other direction like a river. The town had been there for around 100 years, but it was growing rapidly. And I remembered this place the way it was before, when it was empty. Nothing but trees and animals. I even remembered this place when it was inhabited by my people. But that was a long time ago. Now the land was being taken over by humans. The humans who would never know about me. The trees quivered in the wind, and I felt the motion of relief flow through my body. Wind was good. It meant the fog would soon be gone. I removed my mask to feel it, but no sensation came. I could not feel the wind. I slowly placed the mask back on my face and glanced down at the grass that was growing beside the road. It wasn't moving. I knew the wind by name. And I knew that it loved to blow the grass along the leaves, spiraling in playful spurts. But this was not a wind I knew. I looked up at the trees above me. The leaves were rustling, as if the wind was blowing. But I was no fool. This was not the wind that was making the leaves move. And because I was no fool, I knew to act as if nothing was wrong. So I walked along the road, pretending everything was going smoothly. The fog was feeling much denser now. And then I realized something. The mist was hovering over the road. If this was a regular fog, it wouldn't be able to do that. It wouldn't even be able to touch the road. But I had overlooked that. I thought it was a regular mist. But now I knew better. What force was this? The sword by my side rung against my hip, calling my hand to grab it. But I resisted the urge. The fog was not a natural thing, and my sword would do no good against it. For hours, nothing changed. Only the fact that for every step I took, the murk became thicker and thicker until it was hard to even see my own feet in front of me. But I pressed on. I could feel the road's presence, so I was not dependent on my sight to follow it. The light from the accursed tower kept drawing my attention from the road. The humans were doomed. That was not a curse from my lips. It was only a fact in my head. I looked ahead. Whatever it was that could penetrate the road, whatever this thing was, it was no spell. No. This was a specter, a phantom, a shadow of some dark thing sliding over the land at night. But what kind of shadow was this? I knew my enemies, but I could not recognize this spirit. I closed my eyes and listened. Silence. A lifeless, empty silence. The silence sent painful chills down my ragged spine, and my feet screamed for a fighting stance. I opened my eyes. There was something new in my sight. Something I did not expect. There, standing along the road, was a multitude of figures. How many were there? I didn't know. They looked familiar to me, but I knew not why. Some stood beyond the road in the far distance, all of them blurred and distorted by the smog of white mist that swirled around them. I caught glimpses of what they looked like. Their features, their eyes, their hands, but I could never stare them straight in their faces. I could only walk along the road, watching them from the corner of my eyes. Following into my vision, they grew larger and larger in quantities. These formless beings drifted into sight, tens, hundreds, thousands, and the leaves in the trees blew harder and the fog became thicker. But no matter how thick the fog became, the figures would not fade. Only their shapes would grow more defined. They swayed back and forth. Others motioned as if speaking to one another. Some danced, and others just stood and watched me. So I closed my eyes yet again, blocking out the phantasmal visions in front of me. And I felt. Only then did I realize, whatever these things were, they could not be felt. No heartbeat, no soul. It was as if they weren't there at all. The burden I carried felt heavy, and I grabbed the straps that held it on to keep it from sliding off my back. I opened my eyes again, and the dark shadow of the figures filled my sight. As the night became dark, the figures grew in size until it seemed they were the only things in my vision. Feeling my destination approach, I began to run. The burden grew heavy on my back, weighing me down as my journey's end came near. Finally, I could see it, right in front of me, at the end of the road. It was a huge stone slab. 4 small marble pillars held it up like a table. I reached it, stumbling a bit, slapping my hands on the surface of the slab to steady myself, breathing deeply to regain my stamina. I untied the straps that held my burden and gently placed the bundle wrapped in a dirty gray cloth onto the stone slab. Suddenly, the ongoing silence was broken. It was broken by the sound of 1,000 voices humming. I turned around. The figures in the fog had stopped moving, standing as still as stumps. The only thing that even showed that they were animate was their mouths. Each and every one of their half-hidden jaws were partly open, slowly closing and expanding as they hummed a tuneless song in unison. I finally drew my sword. I had had enough. "Who are you?" I bellowed out at the figures, my own voice sounding strange to me. Whatever these things were, they were here to stop me, and I wasn't going to let that happen. I turned back to the stone slab and began to unwrap the bundle. But as I proceeded, the humming turned into a chorus of shouts. I tried to ignore it, continuing to unwrap the cloth. The sounds became louder and louder until the voices joined into an ear-splitting scream. I couldn't help but drop my sword and cover my ears, but when I covered them, the echoing sounds of their wails ran through my hands despite my efforts. I turned around to face them once again, their jaws gruesomely gaping as the screams escaped their mouths. The blinking red light of the cell tower caught my eye. Why could I still see the bloody thing? And then it hit me. It hit me hard. The light to the cell tower was not, nor was it ever a light to a cell tower. The red light that should be gone. The small red light that I had known so well. It was coming to me, slowly moving like a drop of blood leaking from a gash. And from below the red light, there was another shadow, another figure. I looked back at the specters. They had changed now. I could see them clearer. Faces. Thousands and thousands of faces, all twisted into a horrific scream. All the faces were statue-like, pearly white and dead. They had no eyes, and I knew who they were. How could I have forgotten? How could I have forgotten the very shapes of my own people? It had been so long ago. I turned back to the stone slab and finished unwrapping my burden. There, laying in front of me, was a human child. Her face was white against the dim light. She was sleeping. I picked up my sword from where I had dropped it and drew it over the human's face. I had done this before. It had been 1,000 years ago, and I had used a knife then. But no matter how long the time since I had done it, I would never forget. The paper-thin, sharpened tip of my sword hovered over her eyes. A voice broke me from my task. The voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it resounded in my head and it drove itself into my very soul. Never again, it said, and a force pulled me back away from the child. I turned around, and there she was. Tall and slender, eye sockets empty, face pale. A diadem sat over her brow, and a fire-red ruby anointed the top. The ruby glowed, blinking and swirling in an infinite dance. "I did it for good," I shouted over the blaring screams. "I am doing it for good. When I take the child's eyes, the humans will be gone. The earth will be freed." "Was the earth free after you killed us?" my people chanted in chorus. "You were destroying the earth. If I had let you go on much longer, there would be nothing left." "You destroyed more than we ever did," they said. "That's not true," I shouted back. "I destroyed you before you could destroy everything." She stepped closer to me, and I forced myself back. If I could finish the task, kill the child, take her eyes, remove the humans, I could save the earth. I lifted my sword, and a great wind soared over me. The force pulling me back became stronger, but I fought it with everything I had in me. My sword rose over the human's face again, but the queen seized my wrist. Her hand was more solid than I was expecting. It was more the hand of a corpse than a spirit. I strained and fought against her, the blade lowering down, getting closer and closer to the human child's eyes. "But," she whispered in my ear, "you are the destroyer." I paused, only for a moment. Yes, a small, very small moment. For a voice echoed in my head, asking the question, "Is that true?" And in my hesitation, I was struck. Unfathomable pain rushed through my body. I fell, I screamed, I writhed. Every inch of me was set aflame. I howled, I flailed and kicked, and my soul was ripped from my body. The morning sun rose over the woods. A clear day made the beams of light touch the forest floor. Birds sang in the trees, bugs leaped from leaf to leaf, and a small rodent darted across the ground. A girl lay on an obscure-looking stone slab. She was sleeping. She soon stirred and opened her eyes. Rubbing them, the girl sat up and looked around, confused. She had no idea how she came to this woods. The last thing she could remember was playing on a swing next to a pine grove. And then, nothing more but flashes of nightmare-like scenes that she took for bad dreams. The girl slowly slipped off the cool stone, and an unfamiliar gray cloth fell to the ground among the fibrous straps. She reached up to take hold of the cloth, but then stopped when she saw something underneath the overgrown grass. It was a figure of a statue. The statue was marble, and streaks of mildew covered its surface. It was a strange statue, to be sure. Whereas most statues are posed like models for a photograph, this one was curled in a ball as if it were in pain or crying. The girl, out of curiosity, tried to push it over. She wanted to know what the other side looked like. She couldn't tell if it was a human or an animal, but the statue was rooted to the ground. The sound of people talking ahead snapped her out of her fascination with the statue. She realized that she was lost and terrified and needed someone to help her get home. So stepping cautiously around the statue, she made off towards the friendly voices, not even realizing that she had trodden on an ancient sword. The stone slab and the strange statue slowly disappeared from her view as she went, leaving the place to be a monument to people who no longer exist. And that is The Fog. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed Everett's comments in the background. Well, I guess it's time to talk about a book that inspired the story. I wrote this story back when I was really into reading Neil Gaiman's writings, especially the books Coraline and The Graveyard Book, especially The Graveyard Book. I'm not really sure why I love that book so much, but it just hit the right notes. So I recommend reading that book if you ever have time to. If you liked this story, which obviously it's nowhere near Neil Gaiman's writing, but you can tell where the inspiration comes from. My current style is actually not quite as dark, much more lighthearted, and I use far less words to describe things now than I did then. So if I end up ever making a video from a new short story, then it'll probably end up being a lot shorter. Also, the painting was a little rushed. It's not quite as detailed as I would have liked to make it, though I must say, for painting in between two large stacks of books, I didn't do half bad of a job. I'm going to try to see if I can figure out a better way to get my camera positioned to film me painting rather than sitting in between two giant Charles Dickens books, as I tried to crawl underneath the phone without knocking it down to paint my painting. So that pretty much wraps it up. Thank you so much for coming and watching and listening to my story. I hope to have another video posted sometime soon. Not sure when, but whenever I do, I will see you next time, and thank you again.